Hello, beautiful people. So we read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it is an autobiography by an indigenous botanist. So that's what Robin does. And it's quite interesting how she combines her scientific career with her indigenous teachings, her learning. Now, I did listen to it on audiobook. I loved it. I will just say that. I borrowed this from the library as part of the library haul to just show you guys. Just for the video. I know it's going to go back on Tuesday probably because the library's not open Sundays and Mondays. But anyway, so it's definitely appropriate for children. It is a longer read in terms of understanding. So even though it looks fairly small and like you could probably get through this in a day or two, there's a lot to understand, right? To take in. So even though I could have probably read this in like a couple hours, it took me like a week to read this off and on, which is not usual for me. Okay, I want to preface that. But what I loved about this was that even though it's a nonfiction, and I don't mind nonfiction, like I'm a nonfiction reader, a lot of people are not, okay? And those that are more like fiction readers, that prefer that, really love this book, okay? So if you're wanting indigenous reads, whether it's because you're challenging yourself or it's Indigenous Peoples Month for November, or you're doing the 23 for 23 challenge, whatever it may be, highly recommend this book. But not only that, you can learn a lot. You can learn about, the scientific method while also expressing or understanding how nature is. It does talk about climate change. It talks about colonization and how our people ways have been destroyed and forgotten and trying to relearn it. There's so much to it. But I also love the fact that Robin, majority of her book was set in the Adirondacks. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And so it kind of gave me this peace of mind. She was telling like little stories about her, her growing up and her with her children. And while I'm a couple hours away from the Adirondacks, I'm in the Catskills, it felt like home to me, right? It felt like we're in the same location. Now, yes, I am on a mountain in the Catskills, okay? All right, there's our Japanese maple tree. No, I don't tap maple, I will be honest. My neighbors / aunt and uncle do up there, or they used to anyway, so we do have a little sap house if we wanted to use it. But there are lots of maple farms around here that do that. So just learning all that was kind of fun because we do go to Maple Weekend every spring. Sorry guys, my phone. But it was that surrounding, right? And then she was talking about the braiding the sweetgrass into weaving baskets and things like that. Now, I didn't learn all of that, but I did learn basket weaving at camp. Like, that was one thing that we did. We learned how to do some indigenous crafts back in the day. So I'm aging myself a little bit, okay? When I went to camp, when I originally started at camp, I should say, we had camp platoons, and each platoon, there were 6, were named after one of the 6 indigenous tribes of New York. Now, unfortunately, they did change that. I think it was stupid. I get why. They didn't want to be seen as controversial. I actually appreciated it because if it wasn't for camp, I wouldn't have remembered all 6 of the indigenous tribes of New York. Now, could they have done a little bit better and like taught us more about each tribe? Yes, absolutely. But we also learned that all 6 tribes worked together to create a community, to you know, have peace and understanding. And I think that's what's really, really beautiful about the or not the Algonquins. I keep saying Algonquins when I try to film. Um, Give me a moment. Okay, so it's called the Iroquois Confederacy. I swear there was a different name for it, but it had all 6 of the New York tribes, which were Mohawk, Seneca, Tuscarora, Cayuga, Oneida, and Onondaga, right? Yeah, those were the 6 tribes. And they worked together to, you know, create peace in New York and really teach people, and there's so many amazing things. Now, yes, the Iroquois don't no longer go by Iroquois. They have a different name. I can't pronounce it. I apologize. So bear that in mind when she does talk about, I don't remember her mentioning Iroquois specifically. But if you're looking them up, just understand that that's what she does talk about. However, she does talk about the other tribes of New York, and you know, she does talk about her tribe. I forget which tribe she's from specifically. No, never mind. Here it is. She's a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, um, which I honestly don't even know where that is. I know that's not New York based. I've honestly never even heard of it, and I want to say it's more Canadian based, but I could be wrong, so I apologize on that. Okay, like I want to make that clear. That being said, I can relate to this author in more ways than just being in New York. So I am indigenous myself. I'm from I'm San Carlos Apache. Okay, and I didn't get to grow up with my culture. That is something that I kind of talk about a little bit on my TikTok, right? Because of my adoption. And it gets very complex. And trying to reconnect with your culture, trying to learn your, you know, the languages and the myths and the legends and the food and the dances and the songs, and there's so many things that go into your culture that you can't just get from reading a book, right? That you can't just get from doing a one-time visit to your people, so the reservation, right? And I'm very far from the reservation, and that costs money, unfortunately. Traveling costs money. And yes, you know, we try to do our best to understand and learn, and you know, what we can with what we have in terms of resources, but it's definitely something that the government, not just the US government, the Canadian government, and a lot of other countries have done this, you know, where they are very harmful to their indigenous peoples and really make them try to assimilate, so that they lose all those precious learnings, those wisdoms, those little bits of pieces that make them part of their culture, right? So while you can take the person out of the culture's never away from them, if that makes sense. Um, so even though I didn't grow up anywhere near my tribe, I've always felt this immense calling to my people. Ever since I was little, I always knew I was Apache. So I want to make that clear. Not a pretend Indian here. I've always been working on reconnecting. And, you know, going through, how do I explain it? So my reconnection, it's not just like, oh yes, I'm such and such tribe, right? Yes, I am, but going through and, you know, having to trace your ancestors back, having to make those phone calls, having to prove that you're so-and-so's child, which is complex with adoption, FYI, it gets really complex, right? I do, like I said, I talk more about it on my TikTok because I feel like that's a little bit more of an appropriate place, because I talk about adoption as well, and that comes with my story anyway, my journey. But just remember that if someone is not related to this author, although slightly, if someone is indigenous, right, and they are white presenting like myself, that doesn't mean that they are less than anyone else, right? You have to take what they're saying and how they're saying it, and judge them for that, right? So like there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that, you know, I would say there's two different groups, right? There's those of us that want to reconnect with our tribes, that want to learn, that want to do better, and want to appreciate our cultures and learn and pass it on. And then there's those of that are, as we say, the pretend Indians, right? That claim they're indigenous, but basically just, you know, put on the most basic, you know, they basically wear being indigenous as a costume, right? They use the chief hat, and they, you know, do the dance, and they, you know, or the Pocahontas costume. And by the way, Pocahontas is a very real person. She was. And she was not the first indigenous missing woman. Like, let's be clear about that. But not knowing her story, not knowing what, you know, tribe you're part of, none of that, right? So you gotta kind of be distinct about where you are within that scope, right? And then of course there are indigenous people that did get to grow up on the, you know, within their people and within their culture, and I think that's really beautiful, and I think that's not something that we talk often enough about. Listening to their stories, I know it's completely different. We may, as those that have this notion of not living on the reservation, have a very different lived experience than those that are on the reservation, right? So I kind of just went off track. My point being is that, you know, we have to listen and learn and do better no matter what your lived experience is, but don't try to judge someone if they're indigenous and trying to learn, right? And that's why reading these books, whether you're indigenous or not, is really important, because it does teach a lot. It teaches us how to treat the land better and see it in a different light, not just scientifically, but in this poetic way of, hey, our people farmed in a different way than what we would consider farming, right? It's not like a set farm. It was, you know, the bison graze, and, you know, the trees fall. There's seasons. There's all these different things that, you know, she talks about the maple syrup season, and how animals knew when maple was ready, or when the trees knew when it was ready to produce the sap, versus the people, right? It's not just, oh yeah, it's so and so date and we're gonna just go tap the tree and stuff. It's looking for those little signs, right? So Earth is speaking in these beautiful ways that we need to listen. Now, I think a lot of us can appreciate that in other ways, like with our animals, right? With your cats or your dogs, right? Where, you know, they could bark, and they, you know, are barking at something and they're trying to tell you something, or they're meowing, or whatever it may be. They're pawing at something. They're doing these little things. But it's reading that for plants, right? It's reading that for weather. It's all those sorts of things. And it's just listening. And I think we can all do better in that time. But anyway, she does have another book called Gathering Moss. I will be reading it probably November. I have a bunch of other books to read for the end of this month, and then I'm gearing up for 31 days of October book reviews. So get ready for fall spooky books. I have a ton of Disney books that I may add. But if you have any book recommendations, feel free to add them. If you read this book, please go ahead and let us know what your review is. And if you don't already, please follow me. Recommend. That would be a big help. Anyway, I'll see you guys later.